This is Under the Cover, where we take you behind the scenes of some of the most iconic photo shoots, music videos, and fashion shows of our time. I'm Kylie Cavaco-Reck, and alongside my father, legendary stylist Paul Cavaco, we'll dive into the glamorous styles and the ingenious collaborations that shaped modern fashion. We'll talk to supermodels, designers, hairdressers, makeup artists, and even a few other stylists to hear their personal stories. Because there's always a story under the cover. It has been said that Christy Turlington is possibly more beautiful inside than out. This is Christy Turlington. Do you remember the first time you met Paul?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul. I'm sure you will. I believe we were at Apollo Studios in New York City, and we were in the back studio shooting with Stephen Meisel for Parley magazine.
It was the cover of Lay magazine, yeah. It was the cover, and we were photographing Michael J. Fox. He was leaving the studio, and you were coming in. And I had never met you before. And we were like, Stephen was like, the most beautiful girl is coming to be the cover. And we were like, we completely gobsmacked when you walked in. No makeup, no hair, still the most beautiful thing we had ever seen.
And this is the cover of Lay, which is like
Lay, yeah. It's
Italian glamour?
It's like Italian glamour, yeah.
And how old are you, Christy, at the time?
16, maybe 17.
I think it's 1986. I looked because I have the cover and I looked for it. So it's probably just before your birthday because your birthday's in January and the cover is, so it's, around the time of your birthday. So you're about to turn 17.
Yeah. That's the only time I ever worked for Lay magazine, actually.
Really?
Yeah, but I remember exactly what I was wearing. And
What were you wearing?
I was wearing like some kind of red jumper because in the picture, Paul, you're like pulling it over my shoulder for the effect. And it's like a full Meisel, like head crank like that. And I have all these like wispy little hairs. And Joe McDevitt wasn't it Joe McDevitt did my makeup? I think.
Was it? I don't know. I always think it's Francois and Orbe at that time, but it could have been anybody.
I think it was Orbe, but I don't think it was Francois doing the makeup that day. And yeah, I just remember it was at night too. I think it was at the end of a day. And so we all went to dinner afterwards. Do you remember that?
We went to the Pink Teacup.
Where's the Pink Teacup?
In the West Village, yeah.
Yeah, I think it moved and then it disappeared. It was
the one on Grove Street.
It was on Grove Street, and Kylie and I lived around the corner at Bedford Street. I just remember we kept laughing because the waitress, the meal was whatever, it was like a hamburger, fries, a cup of coffee, and a piece of pie. That was the entire meal. That's how you got it.
That's all that was available to you?
That was what but it came as all those things. It wasn't like you ordered them separately. That was the meal. And
it was a happy meal.
It was
with a coffee.
Chrissy had just come to New York from San Francisco. She was, back and forth at that point, right? Or had you graduated already from school?
No, I was still back and forth. And we said San Francisco, but it was really the burbs.
I feel like you've told your story a lot of times. So, But I guess my question is, when we think about, like, someone will ask me, they'll say, where are you from? And I live in Los Angeles now. And I say, I'm from New York. And my daughter literally dies of embarrassment because she's like, we're not from New York. We live in Los Angeles. But I am from New York in my mind.
Yes.
Right?
Well, you were born here too.
Totally. So that to me is I'm fully a New Yorker. Right. Where do you feel like you're from?
I would say I'm from California, but I'm very much a New Yorker. I moved here. I mean, I didn't graduate from high school until 1987, but I was in my whole being and my heart living in New York from the day that I first arrived here in like 1984. So it was just like, how do I get there and how do I make this my home completely? And so I'm a New Yorker through and through. But I do have some of that origin story in Northern California.
Do you remember when we lived across the street from each other?
That was good. That was
very good. This was, I feel like, so at this point, we're now the 90s, like the early 90s, right?
Yeah.
We would find each other, all of us, at the Japanese restaurant around the corner. Or sometimes you would, in that era, you would go to a yoga class. I think it was at a place called Jiva Mukti. Is that correct? Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I would see you leaving. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, my mom didn't go to the gym. So like, I didn't really know what that really looked like, to be honest. And I would think to myself, this gorgeous human being is walking around like this and going into a class with people. And they must have thought to themselves, well, I give up for the day. I give up for the day. Why bother? It's never going to be like that. But the thing about you, which is when I did some research for the podcast, first of all, when you Google and you do an investigation of Christy Turlington, pretty much across the board considered to be the most beautiful person in the world. And what's, I think, so special about you as a model, or you as a person, but particularly you as a model, is everyone also agrees that all of your model friends agree that you're the beauty. And then you go in a picture and you actually just make the picture more beautiful, but everyone still looks really, really beautiful, which has to be something in you, that everyone feels more beautiful around you. So I imagine these people in the Jiva Mukti class originally go, oh my gosh, here's Christy Turlington, I'm about to do yoga with her. And they're feeling sort of self-conscious or whatever. And then you start going and they're like, wait, now I'm gorgeous too. I do imagine that.
It's very humbling, but also surreal to hear anyone talk about me in that way. I don't feel that way. I don't feel like when I walk through the world or when I'm getting on the subway or when I'm going into yoga class that I am anything special or look any which way. I don't feel like people treat me that way either, to be honest. So it's so weird when I do hear my peers say that. It's very kind. And I don't take it lightly, but I can't, it's hard for me to see that or to understand that. And I don't feel badly about myself. I just don't see that.
Well, you're a mom, so as am I. And I find I'll talk to my daughter and I'll say something like, oh my gosh, you're so pretty. And she'll look at me like, I am. And I think to myself, yeah, this is not my opinion. Like the planet would agree with this. You just are. And I feel like you probably feel that about your daughter too.
You know, it's interesting. I think it's a really good point that you make, because I think a lot of parents believe that their children are perfect, right? I don't think I grew up with my parents thinking I was perfect. When I have met all different kinds of people in all different kinds of professions, there's a thing that usually people that are successful have, which is that their parents really invested everything into them and have made them believe that they are the smartest, the prettiest, the funniest, all of the best things that they can be, the kindest in the room. And that ultimately is what gets you there. But I love my parents, but I just didn't grow up feeling at all special. I would leave home to stay with a grandmother to be spoiled, actually. Just to have time away from my sisters and to be treated a little bit different, or to be treated as a, I wanted to be an only child, which I'm sure most kids do at some point. But I didn't have that feeling in my family of being special at all.
I mean, as the story goes, my understanding is that you and your sister both went to meet the modeling scout or the agent.
So we lived in Northern California, and then my dad got a job. Well, he worked for Pan Am Airlines, for people who don't know what Pan Am was, which is happening all the time now. I say Pan Am and they're like, what? So both my parents worked for Pan Am, but my dad was a training captain for 747s. And at the time, Pan Am's headquarters were in Miami, Florida. So we moved across the country in 1979 for about 4 years while he worked there. And while we were there, we kept horseback riding. And after school one day, while we were having a lesson at our barn, there was a photographer there taking photographs of a few young women from my school, young girls from my school that were actors. They were in commercials and stuff. So it just happened to be a coincidence that I knew who these girls were, but the photographer was just taking stock photos of them for their headshots, I guess. And in between shots of them, he would kind of come over to the corral and watch us do our lesson, which is a little creepy. And afterwards, my mom, who was amazing and would drive us, out there and wait for us for our lessons, was sitting in the car, just doing her thing. And he came over to her and he asked, could he take our photographs? And my mom said yes, strangely. And my older sister, Kelly, was so excited about the idea of it. And I was like, why? Why would you want to take our pictures? A few weeks later, I think we went to his house. His wife was was a makeup artist rather, and she made us up. And then he took photos of us. And the whole experience for me was awkward. Like everything about me at that time was very awkward.
Well, how old are you? You're 14, right?
Yeah, I think just early 14. And he would say things like, look bitchy, or like he would say words like that I was like, I think I'd watched, there was a show at the time called Paper Dolls, or a movie or a television special.
It was a TV show, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the only understanding or awareness I had for what a photo shoot could be. So it was like a half day or so. We did, some studio shots and then some shots on location. We brought our own clothes, which were not particularly fashionable.
Do you remember what you wore?
I remember one sort of gray, I don't know if it was like a romper of some sort. I remember another kind of maybe t-shirt and shorts. I mean, it was the early 80s, so it was kind of cheesy. Everything about it. I had little flats that had little holes in them, pointy toes.
So this is evidence that the model makes the clothes.
The clothes were not happening so much, but also this guy was not the most contemporary of photographers either. The pictures are absolutely horrific. I mean, it's kind of a little bit Flashdance inspired, I want to say. Oh. Curly hair in some of the shots, way too much makeup. Not good at all. But they got into the hands of a local agent whose name was Michelle Pommier, who, I don't know, Paul, maybe you knew Michelle Pommier. She was a Ford model. Her big claim to fame was that she was in one of those Virginia Slim campaigns, not high fashion, but a Virginia Slim's kind of like Cheryl Tiegsy type person. Mm. And she had an agency in Miami. So we went to go and see her, and I didn't know Eileen Ford yet. I met her through Michelle, but she had a similar kind of personality, like no nonsense, a little tough love, a little gruff. She looked at me and she was like, yeah, I think you can work. And she looked at my sister and she's like, how tall are you? I don't think so. Just really
oh, wow.
Well, so how tall are you at this point?
At that point, I'm probably about 5'8". I'm 5'10" now. So I kept growing until I was about 19.
Oh, wow.
And I had braces. I think my hair became much curlier when I became 13 or 14. So I had a lot of hair, and in Miami, I couldn't really control it. So I had a little, I was skinny with a little head and a little face and braces and a big smile and hair that I could not control. And she was like, yeah, you're going to do great. And my sister looked at me what? How is this possible? So I started to work from that point on, but little things. Just I think one of my first jobs was for a Girl Scout catalog.
Oh.
Another job that I did actually pretty regularly was doing tween clothes for a department store called Burdines. And Burdines was kind of cool. And I think I learned a lot there just by doing it fairly frequently, a couple days a week after school for a few hours. But they would have models come down from New York for special bookings. So I think I got to see Hunter Reno, who was also from South Florida. So she was a peer, but she was doing really well at that time, working a lot for Vogue. I thought she was amazing. I think Janice Dickinson and Debbie Dickinson still came down to do different jobs. They were from Miami. There were just different people that I started to, once I started doing it, I started paying attention to magazines and commercials and things, and I started recognizing some of the women who would come down for those jobs. I was like, wow, they're coming from New York, big city.
How did you end up in New York?
I was maybe in Miami for a year working a little bit. And while I was there, I got to meet two agents. I met or a scout rather, from Eileen Ford, another former model named BB Monahan. And did you know her, Paul? Does that name ring a bell? No. And then I met a very unsavory type today, an agent from an agency called Karen's in Paris named Jean-Luc Brunel, who was amongst the scandalous male French agents. And those two agents I met within probably a week or so, and they both said, "Oh, you should come to New York or you should come to Paris." And I think I must have met Jean-Luc first, so I was all excited about going to Paris. But we moved back to California a few months later. My dad actually had a heart attack. And after that, we were like, "You can't fly, and we just need to get back to be closer to family and sort of resettle out there." So in the year that I moved back to California, I still had this like dream, like, I'm going to Paris next summer. I'm going to Paris. I don't care. And so my mom came with me to Paris the following summer when I was 15. And I spent about a month there working. Well, not really working. I think I did 3 jobs maybe, but doing a lot of go-sees and getting to know the city and like having my mom to myself. And it was great. I loved it.
You got to have your only child dream, and in Paris. What could be better?
Yeah, in Paris. Mm-hmm. And
Did
then
you
we
speak
stopped.
French?
No, my mom's from El Salvador, so she speaks Spanish, but she also, because she's bilingual, she could pick up other languages easily, and so she could speak French a little bit, not fluently, but we had the best time together. And I mean, I learned certain words, but I really just I loved the time, really mostly because of her, but also just exploring. I'd been to Paris once before when I was about 12 with my mom also. And so I thought this was the life, this is going to be the beginning of my new life. But we stopped in New York on our way back from Paris for a few days. And then I had that feeling again of, now it's New York. New York is the place that I want to be. I like Paris, and I luckily had gotten to spend a lot of time there, but it's really New York that was calling me. And it was also easier for me once I started to do better quality jobs, to be able to come and go from school in California. And I kind of commuted on a fairly regular basis for a couple of years till I graduated.
An interesting quality of this podcast so far has been that many people that have been on this podcast did not graduate high school or college. But really college seems to be a commonality. And what's so interesting is that you actually did graduate college.
Yeah, I did. I almost didn't graduate high school, by the way. When I moved here, like the day that I turned 18, I flew on a trip with her Brits to Asia. I was in Bali and Thailand, gone for like 6 weeks. And on my way back, I came back through New York, and I already had my apartment picked out. I rented an apartment in the back of my agent Eileen Ford's daughter, Katie Ford's apartment building on Grand Street. So when I came back and I was 18, I was like, I'm not going back. Why would I go back to California? Like, why? That's just going to like hold me back. But my mom campaigned very heavily, and I'm very grateful that she did, so that I finished. And I didn't go back for a graduation. I'd already kind of left my regular high school to go to a professional children's school. But I kept it up, and eventually, probably a little bit late, but within the next year, I graduated. Because the moment that I was no longer a high school student who was modeling part-time, I felt a pull again that I needed to go back to school. So I did go to college. I think, again, 2 years or so after graduating, and I'm just a model. And yeah, I was doing really well and working all the time, but I still felt like it doesn't feel very satisfying. It doesn't feel like me. And my older sister, the one who didn't model, she was in college. And my mom went back to school as well at that time when we all left home. So I kind of felt like the odd woman out. And I just became obsessed with like, I want a liberal arts degree because that's what my mom's doing, and that's what my sister's doing, and that's what some of my friends are doing. And so I started talking about going back to school, but I didn't actually apply until 95 or so. I think I was almost 26 when I went back to college. And And I was at NYU for 4 years.
At this point, you are a very, very successful model. It's not like you didn't go back to school, you know, in a moment where you were like, oh, I think I need something to do. You were very busy. And at this point, so if my memory serves correctly, which sometimes it doesn't, in the 90s, really, it seemed like fashion shows it was now print and runway were the same girls had really taken off at that point. So, which means that now you're in New York, you know, that's your home base, but you're gone for Fashion Month, so to speak, which now at that stage happens twice a year for the, you know, fall and spring, but then also the couture shows.
Right.
So it's 4 times a year.
So it's 4 times a year that you're gone and you manage to stay in school. When you're how are you changing gears from going from like, what does the other side of that life look like? So we've got your life that obviously we've seen, you know, chronicled throughout fashion magazines and documentaries, but what's happening in your world?
I'm living in New York, loving my new apartment, and I'm 18, 19 years old, and I start to work for Calvin Klein under an exclusive contract, which I was thrilled about. Like Calvin was, you know,
and we were not. And we were not.
We meaning people in the fashion industry.
The fashion.
It was definitely premature. You know, it was like I hadn't really yet been on my own. You know, I wasn't tired yet at all. Like I was into it, but this opportunity came up and it was a really great opportunity. So I signed this exclusive contract and then suddenly I couldn't work with all of my friends. I couldn't do all of the cool, fun, you know, editorials, and I couldn't do the shows, and I couldn't do all the fun stuff. I mean, love Calvin, but it wasn't the most exciting brand. It just was like very elegant and very classic, and you know, still some of my favorite advertising that I've ever done over the years, but still just like not where I was at yet in my head. So I had my first boyfriend, who will remain nameless, but you both know him. And I spent a lot of time in California again. I went to LA and I took some classes at UCLA. I started like exercising, and I don't know, I was like a lady who lunches when I was 19.
Is this the same boyfriend that we were with you in Aspen?
Yes.
Where I now have a store, full circle, and I drive down the road when I'm with the team on the way to the Aspen store, and I say things like, and this is where, you know, Christy stayed with her boyfriend in like, you know, 30 years ago.
Well, also people have to know that Christy talked me into taking you to Aspen for Christmas because well,
that's what I said. And
then you said to me, it looks like Switzerland. Your mom had just passed away. It was our first Christmas without her. And I was like, what am I going to do? And you said, go to Aspen, because we used to go to Snowmass. I said, go to Aspen. It looks like Switzerland. And we ended up going and I saw you there. We spent time with you there. But
that's what I was going to say. So I always say when we drive, I always say, in fact, not only was I here with Christy, she is responsible for the reason that I first came to Aspen.
And I really can't go back there anymore because of this boyfriend.
Well, you know,
that was a lot.
Everything gets tainted.
Well, but so I was under this contract, living a different life than I was not ready for yet. And then I got out of the contract. I got my hair cut by Orbe, which was not allowed during a contract that was exclusive. And we had to break up, but we renegotiated the contract. So I still worked for Calvin.
Meaning
for the fragrance.
You and Calvin, not you and the boyfriend.
Me and Calvin. Yeah, me and Calvin. No, it
when
took me a lot longer to break up.
You're not allowed to. When you say you're not allowed to cut your hair when you have a contract, can you, for people that are listening, explain what that really is about?
I kind of liken it to, which I think has a more awareness around, like the way that Hollywood used to have these contract players, and you would sort of be under a pretty serious contract with a studio or something. With our industry at the time, and more, I would say beauty contracts would do this, but the few that did fashion contracts, it was kind of like very controlling in a way. It was like you had to kind of continue to look a certain way. There were clauses in case you got pregnant, because then you could get dropped from your contract because, God forbid, you couldn't wear fashion sizes if you were pregnant. So there were a lot of like a lot of hard rules, and it was very one-sided, right? It wasn't like, oh, let's say the company I'm working for goes through some big scandal or there's some big thing that happens. I can't get out of that contract, but they can get out of that contract with us for a lot of like kind of any reason. But I did it kind of knowing that they wouldn't be excited about it. But I also did it knowing that I kind of wanted to get out of that contract. But the cool thing was I still worked for Calvin, and actually with that new haircut, I still did his campaign the next season and opened his show the next season. So it didn't really impact anything there, but I was free, which was great. And then I really had, and this is a very long-winded answer to what you asked about.
No,
industry that, because by then it's like 1990. And in 1990, I kind of went back in full force and was so excited. We got to do the shows, which again, I really had done a little bit of in New York, but I hadn't really done it in Europe. So suddenly, you know, the Versace show, and we had done the George Michael Freedom video around that time as well. So there was just a lot of excitement around the group of my peers and I being in the shows, and it was really, really fun. And then I just kind of burned out again. Like I did that fully for about 3 years or so. And then I was like, okay, now I'm kind of ready to have more of a balanced life and to go back to New York and kind of create more of a home for myself and maybe think about going back to school. So I quit smoking, which was a thing that I had been doing for probably 10 years. And then I applied to NYU and then I got in. So I didn't really like leave it dramatically and just go back to school. It was definitely a phasing of, you know, I'm trying to get myself ready for the next phase of my life. And I still worked for Calvin, and and at that time I worked for Maybelline as well. So I didn't like take any huge risks. I had 2 pretty lucrative contracts, and I had freedom to be able to pick and choose what I wanted to do at that point. So I just made a choice to come back to New York. I was with another boyfriend by this time, another also not great guy.
But this is what it's like to be in your 20s. I mean, let's not
true.
talk about my boyfriends on this podcast ever.
We will not talk about your boyfriends on this podcast.
So, I mean, I feel like, you know,
That's another podcast.
That's a different podcast, but I think it's like part of finding your true love in life is exploration of your true love of what you want to do for your job, how you want to live your life, what you want your family to look like. And so if you don't try things on, you kind of don't know. And then you can't recognize it when you see it. I mean, if I had met my husband when I was not that old when I met him. I was 27 when I met him. But if I'd met him when I was 22, I don't know that I would have been so excited. But, you know, and now at 47, I think, oh, thank God that's the person I chose. But
yeah, lots of lessons with both of them. And there was something for me, especially when I was working at that faster pace and traveling so much of the year, something just felt good having a connection, a commitment somewhere else. I think they also enjoyed the fact that I was not ever home, because they weren't the most committed guys. But for me, it felt like, you know, it's a lot to be out there. It can be a very lonely existence. It can be fun, but it can be also kind of a lonely existence. So there was something for me that I felt like, oh, and I have a boyfriend, or I have a fiance, or I have a somebody somewhere. And somehow that might have protected me from other situations that might have been worse. So all in all, I feel lucky and grateful. But yeah, so I bought a townhouse in 1994 and I converted it fully. And that also was part of my kind of grounding and getting back to like having my home feel really like, I mean, New York was my home, but really creating the life that I now would say is home. And in that time, I was back in school full time. And I felt like so excited by what I was doing for myself, that I was like, I'm doing this in 4 years. I'm not going slow. I've got so much time to make up. Like I felt like I was behind.
How old are you at this point that you're making up time for?
25, almost 26. But for a student, like everybody was 8 years or so younger than me. Like I was, old for a student. But I also never felt, I guess, back to your original point about like, how did it feel being a model and being in school? I didn't feel like, I already felt kind of like that height, even though really it wasn't the case, but I felt like the height of my career was a little bit past me. Maybe that's just psychologically, but I was like, yeah, I have these jobs, but I don't feel like I walk down the street and I have any kind of, I didn't feel like famous or like I can't go into a classroom. I didn't have that experience. And I kind of loved it because it was scary to do in the way that it was hard for me to sign on to this podcast, going back to school and writing a paper and doing all my work on computer and learning how to, like cite my sources and, like all those things, it was really challenging just having been out of school for 8 years. And so I kind of loved that. I loved that every semester I'd have to stand up and say my name again and talk about what I was interested in. And I loved it. I was a kind of classic return student, which means that you're like front row, hand up. I read every single thing they put in front of me because I thought that's what you're supposed to do. But of course, everybody else is shopping and planning their next vacation. But I literally was so in it and so excited about it that it's still some of my absolute favorite years and where I kind of became, I think, me.
But I think the thing also, when you modeled, you were fully in it. Like I never felt that we were in the studio and you were not giving everything. It was always, which was what made working with you so joyful. You brought all of you.
I would say with you. I mean, it's funny. I was describing that to I was sitting for an artist the other day who's a fine art painter, and he's very like hyperrealism, like Vermeer style, old master style painting. And we were talking over the 3 or 4 hours we were together, and he was asking questions about sitting for photographers. And I was saying, like, that feeling that you just described where I'm in it, that wasn't the norm, I don't think. It was special when it was you and it was Stephen, and it was like there was certain groups that I felt inspired by and with. And it would feel fun and it would feel playful and it would feel like you were creating something special and something magical and something memorable. But most days, if you're working 300 days of the year, that's not that's
the case
not
with
the vibe.
Almost any job, right?
True.
It's a job. So some days are amazing and some days are like, that's really...
I have to say, I'm going to say though, because you had to work with a lot of people. I always had very few people that I worked with. And I was also at the point where I could kind of choose who I worked with. So I felt almost every day was magical. And
I'm trying to make us feel bad?
No, I mean,
I still aspire to that.
Look, because I always think, I was usually happy when we were working, right? Wasn't I usually happy?
Always.
Yep. So I loved everyone we worked with. I think we always had fun. When you came to the studio, it was just like seeing you here. And I haven't seen you in several years. It's like, it's Christy. It's going to be a great day. We're going to do the best pictures. And we were lucky in that way that we had that opportunity to be and create together, like you were saying. You knew you were going to do something. Even if it was terrible, you knew you were going to learn from it, so it was fine.
But let's level set here for a second. So at this point, if Christy's 26, right, she's been modeling 12 years, which means that, and if she's 26, it means you're at least in your 40s and you've been doing it for 20 years. So, you're all kind of experts. It's not like you're all like, if me and my friends went to the studio, it's going to show up and we're going to have this great thing. You've got,
lots of time and history.
And master photographers, master hairdressers, incredible makeup artists. And then, the
interesting thing is when Christy started with us, it was not, Meisel had just also pretty much started. It was the beginning of Stephen's career.
in the Apollo days.
In the Apollo days, it was the beginning of Francoise Norris's career in New York, Orbe's career in New York. So I was the oldest one. I just found out I'm not that much older than everybody else. I always thought I was infinitely older because I was also the only person with a child.
That's true. You were the only person with a child, and you were also from New York. Al Stephen's from New York,
too.
But most of us are transplants, you know?
Yeah.
So I think there was this kind of, you know, it's not so much age, but it's experience, and it's just like comfort in being, you know, in that world. And you knew so many more of the players, and you know, like you and Stephen taught me so much, and Orbe and Francois, right? When we would go watch movies and talk about this one and that one and this club and that club, like you all were the kind of experts of New York City and of the fashion that we all kind of came to New York City to be a part of. And so you really did kind of, I mean, we were lucky really to cross paths.
And we all used to ride around in Orbe's open Jeep, drive around the city. So we had a great time. So I mean, I have to say my career was great for many, many years, but you, Linda, Naomi, were part of what was the most important. And for me, even though I had been in it for a while when I started with you, it made the biggest impact in my life.
I find this to be the most interesting because, in fairness, when we talk about like what was Christy's life like outside of modeling, and she's talking about being home and like kind of finding her place and whatever, we may have been in the most hideous point of our lives. I mean, it was, and so what was really special is that everyone became family. Yeah. And it was, so everyone worked together, but you all spent your social life together too. And, you know, it was, and everyone was very warm with each other because I think being creative is isolating and lonely. And then when you find people to be creative with is exciting and fun. And then you're doing great work. And as you're kind of all working together, amazing things are happening. And that collective group of anything coming together, like the reason that George Michael video is incredible is because you're all in it. It's a giant group. If only one of you had been in it, it would have been special, but it was this collective. And that time period was so much about a collective and a group of creative people who were free. There was so much freedom at the time. It wasn't like, oh, you know, minus this contract issue. But other than that,
the contract issue was a big issue. But I kept trying to go back to find photographs that we had done together. And I realized there was a period where we worked a lot together before Christy got the contract. And so there were all these pictures for a lot of Italian advertisers.
Right.
I couldn't afford the magazines because they were so expensive. And I would see it. I go, okay, I'll come back and buy it when, and then they'd be gone. So I didn't have it. So I kept looking at it. I photographed Christy so many times. I spent so much time. Where are these pictures? But then I realized, and then you had the contract and we couldn't photograph you unless it was a Calvin thing. So you could get Christy for a picture unless it was a story on Calvin Klein.
But then there's also a part of the storyline when you're really less of a stylist and now you're really more producing fashion shows. So there's a whole moment in time where you all are spending years together that there's probably not an enormous amount of photographs from it before you went to Bazaar.
That's true.
So there's, I bet we can find good video.
Probably.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. And didn't we do Perry Ellis together with Mark?
We did, yeah. It was his very early Mark at Perry Ellis with Stephen, Francois, Orbe in, I think it's Atlantic Beach Club.
That's right.
It was there because you have the picture I could find was you with the towel on your head and a bathrobe.
Yeah, there's another one with like a white shirt and like a heel. Those are really nice.
But the thing that's so crazy is I don't think Mark for Perry Ellis had done a bathrobe and a towel, which is what Christy's wearing, and that became one of the big ads.
But because back then,
you were free,
Yeah.
right? So it wasn't I'm shooting look 6 with the hairdo that went down the runway with the feeling. It was like, we're going to shoot a bathrobe. And that's the vision.
Yeah, no, I think we got away with a lot. But we also, even if we weren't supposed to do it, we did it. Stephen was a very good ring master, the puppet master of making us do this. We would go, okay, fine. And we would all just do. And it always turned out, really well. Luckily, it turned out well.
It's true. I mean, I can't think of something. There's not. I think to his credit, there's not a thing, even if it was for a department store, right? There was not anything that was done that didn't turn out beautiful, right? Like, obviously, some stuff stands out much more than others, but there was never a day that you spent there where you know what I mean? Like, there was no wasting of time. And I think you're right. Like, we got away with a lot in terms of what we could do. I mean, I remember Calvin shoots where they'd have like rooms of white button-down shirts from all different kinds of brands. And I was like, but wait a minute, this is Calvin Klein and we're selling a white shirt for Calvin Klein, but there would be everything on the rack, you know what I mean? And it would just be to get the perfect. And again, it was all of that kind of aspirational advertising, right? It's like you're trying to set a mood and inspire people for a lifestyle.
We weren't using we were selling the dream, not selling the product. The actual product.
Which is, I think, what
difference.
Gave way to this sort of idea and understanding that all of the models in the era were sort of the first influencers, because it was this idea of this dream and what the life they could be living in these clothes in this moment. Where are they? Why is it, what this beautiful house they're in, this location, they have, the way they hold their bodies, but also like the apple or the peach you would have in your hand. It's like, oh, that looks like the tastiest peach ever. And there were always those moments that now if you saw it, it would feel silly, but we take photographs people take photographs all the time now. And so at the time it was like a documentation of life, which made it then not feel it felt free.
Well, it's funny because we did go, because we went to see Liza Minnelli at Radio City one time. And a group of us went.
Liza with a Z?
Liza with a Z. Yeah, and so it was Christy, Linda, Naomi were there, Stephen, Anna Swee, me. I forgot who else. And you were all completely dressed, looking so glamorous, which is not your normal thing. Like, you dress beautifully, but it's always sort of like normcore. Yeah. And they were we're going out at night. They were completely dressed. And it gave, like you said, it was a glamour. It was, people wanted that life. So there was like influencers.
It was fully influencers.
But yeah.
And
well, it's interesting because I feel like, some people have that natural style, right? Like Kate has great style and people have always noticed her style. I don't think I had my own personal style. I don't know what that was.
You got to be the beauty. You don't get to be the style icon too.
Yes, we did. You've had.
But actually, that's not true. So this is the other thing that was interesting when I did research. There are a lot of people that are, when, this moment of like, quiet luxury happened very recently, there's a lot of pictures of you. And it's all of this.
It was a camel coat.
It's a camel coat. It's it's timeless and classic. So, I mean, let's be honest.
But that's me by Paul or Tawny or, you know what I mean? That's like a take on me. I mean, I'd say that would be my default, but I learned it because I felt good in it over time. But the night that you were talking about at Radio City, I think I'm in head to toe Chanel chic, which I probably did 4 or 5 times. But those times I was out on the town and was photographed in them. Naomi was probably head to toe Azadine Alaya, and Linda was probably head to toe Chanel, also, or Versace. And I think there was something to that in that moment, but it was a moment. And if I look back, I'm like, oh, would have been cooler if I'm like my Chanel jacket and my jeans. But I didn't have my own sense of like how to put that together. I really did not.
Well, also Carlene Surf had not come onto the American scene where we learned about the mixing of it. So we were all like, it was like, oh, Chanel, yes, yeah. It was Carlene who taught us really the high-low of it.
True.
She taught the world high-low.
Yeah.
That's where that idea of the mix is Carlene. I mean, so when did you become the face of the Met mannequins?
That was, I think, around 93. They were doing... Same era. They were doing a big retrospective for the Costume Institute. And I think it was like 100 years of Vogue, I think. And I was selected to be the face of the exhibit. But the exhibit encompassed 100 years of fashion. So there were mannequins. This was actually pretty fun for me to do. I got to spend a little bit of time in the Costume Institute, just getting to see how they stored the clothes and how they curated the exhibit. But then I also sat for an artist to do my mannequin from Pucci Mannequins. And that was like literally like having my face sculpted by an artist. And then they made that image into mannequins, but they made that into mannequins of male mannequins, young girl mannequins, all different versions of mannequins.
Little kids. Didn't they do little kids?
With my face. Yeah, but little kids.
Didn't your dad do it too, though? Wasn't your dad part of it?
No, but
I thought your dad was the male face.
Made it. No, they just made it from her face.
He came to the opening. He came to the opening with me, which was awesome. And I think I look like 50-50 of both my parents, but I would say the male version looked very much like my dad young. But they didn't like necessarily replicate it. That would have been nice though. He would have loved that.
It was like the chic version of Madame Tussauds.
But then Orbe did the hair for it, and he did this whole thing with raffia, because it's like, how do you do hair for, again, that period, that amount of time, and with so much change over the years and so many different trends and styles. So he ended up using raffia. And so the mannequins looked, in the end, they looked less like me than they did kind of weird pieces of art that had different fashion and then these different raffia, hair pieces. But it was pretty special. Even me at that time working with everybody and sort of having so many opportunities, I would say that was definitely a moment of like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm the face of the Met.
Yeah. I do say all the time, I really think I should have named this podcast Legends. But anyway, we call it Under the Cover. But I do think it's like, the behind the scene of what was really going on. And hopefully the story
because you were there and because you know what all does go on behind the scenes, it makes you uniquely poised to do this well, It's really my love letter to all of you. It was such a special time in my life, and arguably a terrible time, but also the most magical. And I think, it's important to tell people's stories. It's important to hear the story also that like they would tell their friend, what it was like to be young, what it was like to be, have a moment. Cause I think people think, oh, you're having these moments and everything in your mind is going great. And it's like, you're having these moments and you're thinking, gosh, I'm going to be, have a boyfriend that's not right for me, or I'm going to want to live somewhere that maybe doesn't suit me because I want to get through this time, or I want to explore. And I think as a mom, I guess I feel like it gives people an idea that everything has possibility. There's so much change that happens, so much changes throughout life. And all the things that we do become the mosaic of our lives. And you guys are all my mosaic. Actually, you said you're 47, so I'm 55, which means that when you were in college is when I was in college.
Correct. I came home from college to your graduation party. So I had a few years left. I think I had like 2 years left. So yes, we were in college at the same time. And in fact, I had friends that were in class with you. And I can tell you that your take on it was not theirs. They would be like, oh my gosh, Christy Turlington is in my class. And she is so smart. She sits in the front. She raises her hand. And and she does all the reading.
Yeah.
So that part's correct when you were like, I did all the reading. But people definitely were noticing you on campus.
That's funny. Well, maybe it's better for me that I didn't know that. Yeah.
It's nice to be able to be where you are. I mean, so much of the theme of today sounds like freedom. Being free is such a nice feeling, and being able to be yourself and to learn and to stay curious.
So, Christy, you just came back from Africa?
Yeah, I just got back from Kenya and Tanzania.
With Every Mother Counts?
Every Mother Counts has really been my main job for the last almost 15 years. And we have partners around the world that are like directly providing services for moms and pregnant people in the US and East Africa and Central America and the Caribbean and Southeast Asia. And so whenever I can, I love traveling, and I loved it when I first started modeling, and I found a way in this advocacy work that I do through Every Mother Counts to continue to travel and to really kind of be deep off the beaten path, I would say. And so I do this trip every year and a half or so. And we bring donors and supporters of Every Mother Counts to meet some of our partners that are on the ground there, and mostly visit clinics and hospitals and schools. And we also sometimes run marathons when we do this work. And so I did that on this last trip in Tanzania, the Kilimanjaro Marathon. So I've become a runner in my adulthood, but I run for Every Mother Counts, and it's sort of now very much connected to the why I run, which is to raise awareness and also resources for maternal health care, but also distance being one of the main barriers for women to access critical care is kind of the reason why running works so well with the work that we do. But I kind of discovered that I love it, and that perhaps had I started earlier, perhaps had I done it in high school, I might have, pursued that in a different form. But I really, really enjoy, again, the freedom of just like, I can go anywhere in the world with a pair of shoes and not have to sign up for class and just go. So
Every Mother Counts is that, grace was the reason that you started it. And I feel like so much of what parents do is because of their children. I think,
this podcast, Grace.
That's what I was going to say. I was about to say, I feel like this podcast. And I think that there's this amazing awareness that you had around the care that you had and how lucky you were to have that care. And, we, I think as a world, don't take care of moms the way that we should and can. And what Every Mother Counts does when you are having a baby, and what you realize how much intervention does go on to save lives, and what would happen if you were alone in those moments or without care is just, it's wild. And I know I definitely had both of my births. Neither of them were particularly easy, but for the, by the grace of God and having my babies where I did, we were all okay. And I think that one of the things that you have made, obviously you've made a giant contribution to the world of fashion and the world of beauty, but this world of maternal health has been a huge contribution in your life and a huge contribution to the planet, and changed the outcomes of so many women all over the world, not just, in Tanzania, but really all over the world.
There's so much to do, but I do feel like the work is meaningful, and I do feel that I've had a lot to contribute, and I think I still I still feel inspired to continue to do it. I feel, especially here in the United States right now, like we have our work cut out, because it's really quite shocking, actually. I was, in Kenya when we had the news about Alabama and IVF recently, and the people I was with in Kenya could not believe the conversation back home for us. So the work is needed more than ever. And I feel lucky to be able to be in a position that I can contribute in the way that I have. But I also sort of imagine that this will be for the rest of my days. I don't see us getting to the place that I hoped we would be at by this time. So Grace is now 20. And I remember when she was born and when I first started advocating on this issue, I would say, oh, by the time that Grace is in a position to be thinking about whether or how she wants to become a parent, this will be the rare event that I thought it was when I became a mom in terms of maternal mortality. And, here we are 20 years later, and the U.S. is doing worse than we were 25 years ago. And it's not looking great. But I do believe just in the opportunity there is to raise awareness and to bring more people into the conversation and more people consciously thinking about their options, if they do have options in terms of who's delivering our babies and who's providing the care that we receive and demanding better quality care and more respectful care. I think that still will get us closer to the outcomes that I hope to see, or I hope for more people that are not even yet thinking about it, like my daughter, hopefully. But yeah, it's I won't say it's fun work, but it feels good to be needed, and it feels good to know that there's purpose and there's urgency and there's demand for the work. That feels really good.
I know I am, and every woman that I've ever spoken to is very grateful for that work. So thank you for all of that you do.
Thank you.
Well, I have loved spending this morning with you, and I appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you for
so much.
everything that you've done.
Thanks for being in our lives.
Thank you for being in our lives.
I miss you guys.
I miss you too. That's why hearing your voice was so like, oh my God, it's Christy.
Now that I'm seeing you, we have to make a date.
Well, we would love that. And we'll see you hopefully soon.
Under the Cover is a production of Knockout Beauty Media Group and Audley. I'm writer and host Kylie Cavaco-Reck. Guest booking is by Paul Cavaco and Lindsay Hannon. Audio and video production is by David Wojcik. Photo research is by Kate Hill. Our executive producers are Kylie Cavaco-Reck and Paul Cavaco at Knockout Beauty Media Group, and Matthew Wells, Lindsay Hannon, and David Wojcik at Audley. Special thanks to Meredith Honig, Jessica Alpert, and John Parati at Rococo Punch, and Rachna Shah, Jamie Karp, and Jenna Preventure at KCD. For photos and more details on the series, follow Under the Cover Podcast on Instagram and Substack at Under the Cover. If you like the series, please leave us a review, and as always, don't forget to tell a friend. I'm Kylie Cavaco-Reck. Thank you for listening.